Thank you, Leymah Gbowee, for taking the time to talk to us about your work and your experiences. And I have read your wonderful book, and in the book you write about how meeting women really changed the way you think about social healing after the trauma of war. And you talk about how these women told you stories and changed your perceptions in many ways. Could you say a little bit about how those meetings were and what they told you that made such a huge impression on you?
Thank you. During the war, I always went around with this feeling of the victim feeling. I am a victim. For some strange reason, I felt like life had been unfair. And so my perception of women as victims grew because as I engaged communities, I wasn't looking for stories of strength, or my eyes weren't looking at things of strength. I was constantly looking for stories that reinforce my belief women are victims. And then as in my journey, I met this group of women from Sierra Leone who were refugees, and I had gone in as a caseworker trainee to work with them on issues, educate them on sexually transmitted diseases, domestic violence, just every day sit with them and get their take on these things. But as I met these women who had gone through some of the worst and had different forms of physical disabilities, they were constantly talking about going back, being the hope of their community. And I mean, after 3-4 days of engagement, one of them recognized, that look of cynicism on my face. And she's like, why do you have this attitude? Were you raped? And then the answer was no, no, no. But as I went home that evening and reflected on the conversation we had, the only word that kept ringing in my ear was hypocrite. You haven't seen some of these things. Moving from those women, I mean, it was like the first eye opener. Look for something. Maybe it's not just them. Then I went to work with the wives of ex-child soldiers, and these girls were the most loving mothers, but most of them had been adopted and raped by these men and kept as their wives. And even after the conflict, because of these children can't go, they're in the middle, but they were really the ones who the men would fear now. So gradually, as I moved from the journey one place to the other, it became very clear to me that yes, there may be this narrative of women as victims, but I've come to realize that when they're raped, they just don't lay down and die. They wake up and they pick up with life, and that is an example of true strength, and so it changed a lot. It changed me personally, because then instead of just looking at myself as a victim, I now started thinking what good I could contribute to my community.
I would be interested in hearing also a little bit about the startup of the movement, because it seems that what you just described, looking at women as resources, as people who are not victims but who are resources for the future, you created an enormous enthusiasm for the movement that you started. And in the movement, it was Muslim and Christian women coming together, and at a time where the antagonism between the Christian and the Muslim world is increasing. And I'm wondering if you think that because it was women who came together, that it was easier to have this interfaith meeting that the movement for praying for peace was.
First, let me start with how we build a movement. Moving from that point, I used to work in an organization where a peace, trauma healing, reconciliation, peace building, community peace building. And I would go in the field to do trainings, and most of the communities we went in, you see 50 participants, 3 women. And during the 5 days of engagement, you never hear them talk. Because I was also the only woman on my team of sometimes 5 men, I would draw to them, and after the session, we'll sit outside and have conversations. And constantly, I realized that these women had opinions that if they had put forth in the meeting would have changed the dynamics of the discussion, but something held them back. So I went back to the office and told my boss, I think we need to start something for women only. And he was like, oh, this girls thing and girls thing, we need to, not go there. And we kept pushing, my other few female colleagues and I. And so the first group of women we thought we wanted to work with was the women in the security sector, because those were women who we felt had some semblance of power. So we go to this meeting with these women, and as we meet with them, constantly, when you ask a question about peace, it comes back to the personal. When you ask a question about reconciliation, it comes back to the trauma that they've gone through. When you ask a question about this, so it was always a back and forth coming back to their personal experiences. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the first day, we decided, let's bring them together at night and have a sit down. And that night, we got into the training room and just trying to be creative. We said, okay, we'll turn off the lights, we'll put a candle, and from one person, when you have the candle, the light is on you. We are not restricted by space or time. You can talk as long as you want to. And one after the other, from 7 a.m., we didn't leave that room till almost 3 in the morning. Everyone had a personal story of trauma that they wanted to talk about. The next morning, we entered the training room, renewed energy, renewed vigor. Women then could engage. Lesson number 1, in order to engage with women in peace processes, you have to first address some of those personal issues, give them the space to talk. Because I have a theory that women are the sponges during conflict. They absorb all of the dirt. The challenge is that because people expect them to be strong, once they take all of these in, there's nowhere to go. Can you talk to your children? No. Your husband is usually in hiding, and so it's always, you have to be strong for everyone. That was the first learning. So then we started doing these women-specific training, and we realized and recognized that these were the people who would easily band together. After meetings, they always had a project idea. So then I had this crazy dream of putting the women of the churches together to pray for peace. And as we worked on the Christian Women Peace Initiative, the Muslim women formed their own alliance. We brought the two together. And so it wasn't like we woke up one morning and said, let's band. We had to do work with different groups at different times, bring both groups together, work with them, create the space for dialogue. I remember the first time we brought the Christian and the Muslim women together, it was the Christian women first, to kind of like tap into what they understand their strength to be based on their religion, their faith background. So we went into the Bible to tease out very powerful women in the Bible who played roles, whether positive or negative, but powerful women. And then we took them to give us their perception about the Muslim woman. The next day we brought the Muslim women in, did similar thing with them. The third day we brought both groups together. And the first thing we did was to put up their perceptions, both positive and negative. And afterwards, we had a conversation about their thoughts about the others. Then we brought 2 women who had been friends for over 60 years, both Christian and Muslim, to talk about their friendship and how their faith never really, so those practical things of really just harnessing our similarities and not really dwelling on. And one person I remember asked the question to these women, in the 60 years of your friendship, how has your religion impacted it? And the Muslim woman looked at the Christian woman and said, when you look at me, do you see a Muslim? And she said, no. All I see is a woman with similar challenges, husbands who cheat most of the time, children with complications, different things, but we've never really looked at the way we pray as an obstacle to our friendship. So those were the kinds of things that we did just to bring women to the place where there was an understanding that what that did for me in my work moving forward is to say, and it's not just women who can form coalition for peace. Over time in this world, what we do, us versus them, is constantly build walls. So he's standing there. I have no understanding of what he's about. He has no understanding of what I'm about. And constantly the wall is getting thicker and thicker and thicker. The more we create the space for dialogue, and I think that's where we are not in this world. We talk at each other. We really don't sit and talk amongst ourselves like intelligent people. So creating the space for dialogue will tear the wall down one after the other. And then once you can see the other for who they truly are, a human being with feelings, passion, compassion, different things, then you recognize or realize that this is someone just like myself. And that's what we did with the women. Gradually, we tore down the walls that divided us: ethnicity, religion, social status, everything. And then at the end of the day, it became very clear. You're a woman, I'm a woman. If shooting started today, it will affect you just as it affected me. The rape and abuse has no religion, or they have no sympathy for those things. So that was, for me, was the beginning of building the movement. And by the time we took off, there was no turning back.
No, we've seen that. And you also received the Nobel Peace Prize for this work, and it's wonderful. But you also continued after the war. I mean, you were instrumental in the peace agreement, becoming a peace agreement in 2003, but then also after the war, the mobilization for the election, which eventually led to Ellen Johnson Sirleaf becoming the first democratically elected female head of state in Africa, and your co-Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Was there a different way of working in the post-war period, you think? And how was it different?
Well, after the signing of the peace agreement, it became very clear to us that what we've seen in post-conflict countries, women fight for peace. Once the agreements or the agreement have been signed, they go back. And we were determined that wasn't going to happen to us. So already from the day the peace agreement was signed, we started asking those who were the implementers of the peace agreement, where are the benchmarks? How do we know when X, Y, Z, or that this process is successful? And they said, well, sorry, we can't give you benchmarks. We took the agreement, 300 plus pages, went back to Liberia, called 80 women leaders. 3 days we sat down and dissected the peace agreement. So then we set our own benchmarks and use it as a means of the women going back into the community to continue their advocacy. Between January and February, in essence, this 100 pages saying there will be disarmament. Between March and April, there will be this. May and June, there will be this. So they were constantly, women were constantly monitoring the implementation of the peace agreement. We said to them, if these things are not happening the way you think they should happen, protest. Afterwards, it was time for civic and voters education. That was when we realized, because we had a radio program, and we thought, let's go out there and just test out the voices of women, especially grassroots women who have been a part of the movement, on what their take on the political season coming up was. And almost 80% of the respondents on that radio program said, politics is not our issue. We should not be involved. Our work and our role was to bring about peace. We've brought peace. It's the people's thing. Quote unquote, those who are educated, those who are politicians, it's their issue. It's not our issue. We came back, and I remember the presenter of our radio program saying we have serious trouble. Because if these women do not register to vote, we cannot, because that is the beginning, not just of the social emancipation, but the political emancipation. Because we've seen over time, it's only educated women that work. And if these rural women have to be involved in politics and their voices must be heard, we need to get them involved in the political process. So we went to some of our partners, and they did not really listen to us. 5 days into the end of voters registration, we realized that time was not our best friend. Women had not registered, especially in the business districts where they were petty traders. So we put out 250 women, 10 in each, 20 in each area, 5 in the office. working the telephone, connecting with the elections commissions. The women will go bring people to register. And if the ink or the film on the camera finish, they call me, we call the office, we're going to schools. At the end of 5 days, we're able to register 7,455 women. That was just the tip of the iceberg. Then we now had to go back to them to say, you have to vote. First round, no one was saying to women, this is the way you vote. Because again, we had 22 candidates. And people would be voting based on their ethnicity, their religion, the similarity or their relationship with people. When it came to the second round, we said to women, this is our chance. And we have to make good use of the chance that we have. But by the time we ended our campaign, the Ministry of Gender had their own campaign of women registering to vote. The total tally of registered voters were 50 plus 1 more women than men.
I would like to talk a little bit about the role of research and knowledge, because also this you write about in your book. When you go to the US and you study, the way I read it is that it has in a way 2 functions for you. One is that you get in a way a new language to do things that you already did, and it confirms in a way, or you get this, or you describe a sense of confirmation that what you had done intuitively was also in a way things that were described in the textbooks. And I'm a peace researcher. I work at the Peace Research Institute in Oslo. And I would love to hear your view on what kind of knowledge, now that you have an amazing experience and are continuing to work in the field, but you also have an academic view on what you do. What sort of knowledge is missing out there in order to get to better peace building, if you like, from where you stand?
Well, I have my own opinion of how peace is conducted and how, quote unquote, the professionals, when I talk about professionals, I'm talking about theoretical, the professors and all of these people, or those who call themselves peace professionals, see the practitioners in the field. Those practitioners who have no idea of what strategic peace building according to the textbook is, or what tipping points or whatever you want to call some of the jargons that we use. There is a disconnect, a total disconnect between academia and practitioners. Over time, there has been some attempt to bring it together, but I think it is missing. Last time I talked with a group of professors, and one of the things I said to them was that it is amazing to see when peace talks are happening, prolonged peace talks, complicated conflicts, how some of the institutes that do research on peace building are totally absent. That's the first thing. So to get an understanding of, and their absence from this space creates or reinforces the idea that practitioners are not professionals, so they should not be around the table. But if you put some of these community women at the table, whatever that mediator is doing, he or she is able to even dissect better the impact of the conflict, the cause of the conflict, do a greater analysis. So if there was a kind of alliance between academia and practitioners in those spaces, I think when people are talking in practical terms, they will be able to translate the message in a more professional term so that people understand that these people knows exactly what they're doing. That's one of the missing links. The second missing link for me is most times when people do research on peace work, I think there are some, they fail to address most of the literatures we see about peace and peace building talks about the formal process and all of these things, but no one really goes down. And because I'm a practical grassroots person, to the community level, to see that in the midst of 20% or 50% of women in this conflict context being raped, what was their strength? I think translating the narrative from victim to survivor as women see themselves has been missing from some of the discussion. So if you read any research work now on Congo, it's going to be more about the rape and the rape and the rape. What keeps them going? What keeps them taking care of children? What keeps these babies healthy even after their mothers have gone through? You don't see that. I think peace building, conflict resolution is a human process. And what researchers fail to bring into that process is the human dimension for me.
So you think greater, let's say, cooperation or greater bottom-up centered research would improve knowledge for peace building, if you like?
I think it definitely will, because you also want to interact with some of, at that space called peace negotiation, is where you have the perpetrators in suits and ties, you have the victims advocating outside of the door, and there is a beautiful opportunity to come at that space and understand what are the potentials or the opportunities for peace. What are the challenges? Who are these people and who are this other group of people? How can we get a greater understanding of why this is not working? I think it's not there. So years after the Liberia peace talk, someone takes the peace agreement and wants to do a research, but the opportunity for doing that research at that moment is there. And you don't find it. Most of the time, those of you who do peace research do it in peacetime. And I think it's time to step into the space when the tensions are up and say, I will do this research or begin the process of my research when the tensions are already high, to gain a greater understanding of how peace can be delivered and delivered more effectively. But it's usually after the fact.
What sort of research and knowledge has been the most useful for you in your work?
Well, I think one of the things that for me was helpful, really put into context my work before, was coming and looking at the whole issue of justice, and looking at the textbook analysis of justice, weighing it against my practical experience and understanding of justice. When you do peace studies, when they talk about retributive justice, restorative justice, the whole concept of justice is like it's easy to deliver. Like many other theorists in peace building. Yes, they will talk about these complications, but when you really sit down and look at the whole concept of justice from a community perspective, that is one of the greatest danger to peace on both scale. Failure to deliver and attempts to deliver. You could just tilt the whole process of peace building by trying to do so. So after reading about all of these things, my own conclusion is that the weight of justice has to actually be justice. You say, what are you talking about? If you are prosecuting someone like Charles Taylor for crimes against humanity, several counts of different things in Sierra Leone war crimes, and you're spending heavy resources on trying this one person, the final attempt is to deliver justice to those he, quote unquote, affected by his hands being in their rebellion. And then you look at these people and they've slumped deeper into another state of poverty because of their amputees, they cannot find jobs. And then you ask yourself, is this worth it?
Yeah.
Whose justice? That's one. The second part that has been helpful to me as a journey is the whole concept of peace and security. People have different explanations and they try to bring all of these concepts together to make it make sense and to apply to different areas. But my final verdict is no matter how much you learn in a classroom or how much research you've done, you can never engage conflict, peace, security from a textbook perspective. Each conflict and each conflict context is unique. And you can't say because they're in the same setting, we're going to deliver it the way we've delivered it. So for one context, you can say we're doing building of schools and it will deliver peace because that's the needs of the people. But in another context, they will tell you, until we sit down with those who have done this and this and this and the other, we can't do that. But my greatest learning from the school and from the community has been work from your head. If you enter a community and your instincts say, take it this way, put down that notepad and work from there. But then you can also come back to your notepad to evaluate the impact of the work that you've done. Yeah.
Well, if you invite us, we'll come and we'll leave our notepads behind. We'll take them up after.
I'm not saying that research is not good, but I'm just saying sometimes the timing, sometimes the understanding, because also in academia, people tend to have this arrogance of knowledge. You know, I've come to deliver peace to this area because I know all of the terminology and I know all of these things. And if you come with that in most conflict contexts, you may fail. You know, you have to go with that openness of, yes, I know what it is in this context, or I feel like I understand the analysis of this conflict, but let me go, because your analysis of that conflict could be totally different from what the community's analysis will be pointing you to.
I've done work in Bosnia, and one thing that women in Bosnia told me was that they appreciated in a way that people who come in from the outside, and it's always difficult, as you say, and there's the risk of being arrogant, and there's the risk of not understanding or even being willing to understand what's happening on the ground. But they, on some level, they expressed also an appreciation of people, like you write in your book also, providing a new language for things that are known, because with a new language, not just English or French, but a new way of talking about issues, you also reach policymakers, people with money, that kind of thing. So is there a room there for some positive cooperation?
Honestly, I'm not saying there's not a room. I'm just saying we need to reevaluate the way we do things in most contexts, because if we don't, we miss the opportunity for scoring big, But there's always values in people coming. But if you come again with that arrogance of knowing it all, communities may show you that we appreciate your being here. But at the end of the day, 10 years down the road, you look back and say to yourself, did we really make any impact in that area? In as much as people were cooperative with us and things were moving, did we change anything? Because the idea of people coming in any conflict situation is not just to impact immediately, but 10 years down the road. It's not a quick fix, you know, stop the shooting, take the guns from the boys, put them into rehabilitation. You want to ask yourself, after we've done all of these, are we guaranteed, or can we guarantee this community that 40, 50 years from now, the remnants of this particular thing will not bring renewed conflict? That is the end result. So I'm saying doing it collectively and doing it right. Because we've seen in many situations where people just come with quick fix. Liberia today has one of those serious challenges. Everyone felt South Africa had a problem. They had a TRC process. So we should. Rwanda had TRC, Sierra Leone had TRC. So obviously it's just like a one-size-fits-all. Immediately after signing the agreements, everybody think this is what you need, this is what you need. And we have a Truth and Reconciliation report that is sitting there, and no one can really say what we're going to do with this whole bundle of recommendations. There is, and it is another cause for tension. So you also want to look at some of these things and say, do we want to go this way, or do we want to wait? Because there's no quick fix to anything. People today are advocating for prosecution. You quickly hear, let's take this other warlord down. And it amazes me when someone sits in America and decides to do a policy that this person must go. You know, one of the biggest worry I have today is there is this thing of Kony, Joseph Kony in Uganda, this whole YouTube video. The question I keep asking myself, yes, how many women in the next few days will be raped, their nose cut off, their lips cut off, because these men supporters are angry because a group of people in their attempt to do good have just tilted another thing that is causing problems for people in the communities. So those are some of the things. Let's engage. I'll give you a quick example of what I'm talking about. In 2003, the women in one of our communities called Totota, the relief agencies had taken and made there was a mandate that they would not serve combatants food. You know, because it's of this whole do no harm, blah, 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 blah. And they brought food against the wishes of the community to the community people. The next day, there was an attack on the community. So these women came down, and we formed a huge delegation of protesters and went back to the UN. And the women were saying, until you can figure out how to deal with these combatants and their hunger issue, don't bring food to us.
Oh, wow.
Because we realized that every time you brought food to our communities, they attacked us. So people died unnecessarily. Yes, we need food. But if you're bringing relief to us would mean more havoc and chaos for us, don't come. So those are the kinds of things that we're talking about. At the end of the day, they sat down with these women, sat down with other entities and other agencies and said, okay, how do we do this? But it wasn't people with the theoretical knowledge coming and saying the rational thing in peace building and humanitarian effort is provide relief for communities. But again, in those communities, the irrational thing for their safety and peace is don't bring relief here. So those are the kinds of things, and those are the kinds of, you know, coming together that we need to start talking about. Engagement of peacekeepers with women. How do they go into communities and understand that in as much as we see them, and already from the mission level, there is that kind of briefing that these are important stakeholders in the communities. You know, and I'm sure the research always influences EU, UN, feed into policy makers and into policies. How is it also being translated into practical interaction? For me, that is where I see value.